Hello, this is Mr. Rahman, and today we're going to be reading Chapter 12 of Iqbal by Francesco D'Adamo, translated by Anne Leonori. That same evening, after dinner, Iqbal made a solemn declaration to the men and women who were meeting in the big downstairs room. I want to stay and help you free all the children who are slaves in Pakistan. Ishan Khan looked at him and smiled. That's not possible, Iqbal. You were very courageous when you rebelled and helped us rescue your companions, but you can't stay here with us. You belong to your family. What would your father and mother say if we didn't take you home to them? What good will it do me if to go home if after a year or even sooner I'm a slave again? Or Maria, or Fatima, or the others? How many children out there working the way we were? We don't know for sure. There are hundreds of clandestine carpet factories just in Lahore, and in the countryside there are the brick-making kilns. Up toward the mountain there are the mines, and then there are the farm slaves, tens of thousands of children, hundreds of thousands, maybe. You want to free them, said Iqbal, and so do I. Maria and I watched, our mouths wide open. We were so impressed. Iqbal was talking like an adult. Think it over, Ishan, one of the men said. The boy is clever and could be useful. You know how hard it is to get the magistrates to intervene. Iqbal could sneak in and talk to the children who would trust him. He can find the proof we need. If it hadn't been for him, we would never have been able to stop Hussein Khan. Ishan Khan continued to shake his head. No, he'd have to learn so many things. I'll learn, Iqbal promised. I've already learned to read and write. Well, a little anyway. It's too dangerous. The carpet merchants and the kiln owners are very powerful. The moneylenders are influential. The police tend to protect them. You've already seen that. And the magistrates just look the other way. All of us here have been threatened and persecuted. No, we can't allow it. Iqbal stood up and drew himself to his tallest, which actually wasn't very tall. He looked immensely tall to us, though, as if he could touch the ceiling. I'm not afraid, he said. I'm not afraid of anybody. They believed him. Iqbal went home to visit his family. 10 days later, Ishan Khan brought him back, and he spent the rest of the day closed up in his room. Toward the evening, he came out and said, My mother cried, and my father was frightened for me, but now they understand my choice and they approve. I've promised that I'll go back as often as I can, especially for our holidays, but I want to stay here, Fatima. I want to study. I want to learn everything I can. I want to be a famous lawyer and free all the children in Pakistan. Good for you, Iqbal, exclaimed Maria. I said the same, but my voice trembled. Iqbal did study. We all did. He also took part in the meetings of the Liberation Front, listening so carefully that his forehead would become wrinkled with the effort to understand. Iqbal read books too, sitting up at night by the light of a candle, spelling out every single word. He learned how to use a camera, and whenever he could, he talked to Ishan Khan. They talked for hours and hours. They were made from the same mold, those two. Over time, our companions returned to their homes. Muhammad left to go back to his mountains, and he stammered out his goodbyes, trying to hide his feelings. Salman went home too, and he said to Iqbal, Brother, I really liked what we did to Hussein, and I'd like to stay and do my share, but my folks need me. Our funny twig left us, and little Ali crying his eyes out. The others went too. Iqbal, Maria, and I remained, and Kareem, who chose to do odd jobs around the house for his room and board. Less than a month after we had been rescued, Iqbal managed to sneak into a carpet factory that was hidden in a damp cellar in the northern outskirts of Lahore. He found 32 children covered with scabies and wounds, so thin their ribs almost cut through their skin. He spoke to them. He showed them the scars on his hands to win their trust, and he took photos of the chains, the looms, the water seeping in. The place was raided 3 days later by some men from the Liberation Front, accompanied by a magistrate and policeman who arrested the proprietor and freed the children. All that night and throughout the next day, Maria and I worked alongside Ishan Khan's wife and the other women, carrying pots of hot water back and forth for baths and making beds for the new arrivals. Were they ever dirty? It was hard to believe that we were like that when we arrived. Iqbal continued to take his declaration seriously. Over the next few months, he helped close 11 more factories. Almost 200 children were liberated. They all passed through headquarters, which at times looked like an orphanage. They were cared for and then sent back to their families. All the children told the same story, our story. They came from isolated villages in the middle of the countryside. There was a bad harvest or an illness, and the families had to ask for loans from the moneylenders. Then the families had to bond their children to pay back the debt. Iqbal wanted to do more. We have to hit the moneylenders, Iqbal said. They're to blame for everything. By now, he had taken his place in the meetings of the adults, speaking up with authority. He was tireless. The minute he finished one mission, he began another. We have to send them all to prison, every single one, he would say. Maria and I were uncomfortable when he was out scoping illegal factories. We were worried and waited anxiously for his return. One night he didn't come home and we were afraid something had happened to him. He returned the next morning with a black eye and cut on his cheek. I found another workshop, he said, but they caught me. They smashed the camera too. Let's just wait a few days, then I'll go back. Ishan Khan was proud of him and treated him like a son. And Maria and I were treated like daughters. We had everything we needed, but still I fretted sometimes. Iqbal's and my paths were going in different directions, and I felt that soon we would have to separate. I was also occupied by thoughts of my family. Sooner or later, my relatives would be found. What would I do then? But there were problems much more important than mine. Ishan Khan was worried. We have to be careful, he said, because the moneylenders and the people who get rich by exploiting children, won't give in so easily. The more children we liberate, the more exploiters we accuse, the more they will try to silence us. That's what they're afraid of, our voice. They get rich and fatten where there's silence and ignorance. One evening, I overheard Ishan Khan talking softly to his wife. It's Iqbal who worries me. By now they know him. They know that it's thanks to him that we can find them. He's so enthusiastic, but he's rash. We'll have to be more cautious. Soon there were two men on guard in the big downstairs room. One night something woke us. We heard strange noises, then gunshots. Then there were shouts and sound of running feet. What's happening? We asked. Out in the street, some people shook their fists at us, and there were tough-looking men on the sidewalk in front of the headquarters. They would stand there for hours, watching us go in and out. When I thought about Ishan Khan's they, I thought of Hussein Khan, but I also realized they had to be something even bigger and much worse. Then came the episode in the market to reinforce my fears. Even in a city as big and modern as Lahore, the outdoor market is the true center of life and activity. Sooner or later during the day, everybody passes through, perhaps to shop and meet friends, perhaps simply to look at people. Periodically, the activists of the Liberation Front would go to the market where they would build a little platform to speak from. Over the platform, they hung a banner that said, "No more child labor." And there were signs with slogans against bonded labor and slavery. The volunteers distributed handouts exactly like the one Iqbal had brought back to us at Hussein Khan's. The men gave short speeches using a big trumpet thing they called a megaphone. A little crowd always gathered. The merchants, especially the richest ones, ridiculed and insulted the speakers. They even threw things at them. The majority of the audience listened passively. Only a few had enough nerve to show timid approval. These were usually farmers or laborers, usually people who understood what it meant to lose a child in that way. At least that's what Iqbal told us, for Maria and I weren't allowed to go. They said it was too dangerous. That day, Iqbal spoke too. He stood balanced precariously on a fruit crate, holding the heavy megaphone. Despite his shyness and embarrassment, despite the shouting, the whistling, and the racket of the onlookers, he managed to talk about his experience. He spoke about Hussein Khan and the carpet factory, about children chained to the looms. Then he named names. He shouted all the names he had heard during the meetings at headquarters, the names of the great moneylenders, the names of rich, important, mysterious men who lived in luxury in the center of town, who traveled, who had business all over the world. Ishan Khan's they. He called them flesh merchants, exploiters, vultures. A riot broke out in the square. A small group tried to attack the platform, pushing, slapping. The police had to intervene, not very willingly. They weren't in the square, of course. They don't go to the open air market, but evidently they have lots of supporters. The next morning, Ishan Khan came in with a pile of newspapers under his arm. There were articles in all of Lahore's papers and also in a Karachi paper. Two of them even had printed photos of Iqbal standing on the platform with that funny trumpet thing in front of his mouth. One of the papers called him the courageous child who had denounced his oppressors, and another talked about the shameful exploitation of a child's innocence. "This is a good thing, isn't it, father?" he asked Ishan Khan. "You said that they keep getting stronger thanks to ignorance and silence. Well, this isn't silence." "Yes, Iqbal," Ishan Khan said, "this is good for our cause." But he didn't seem convinced. He looked worried. I remember that period so well. Iqbal was happy, enthusiastic about everything, hungry and thirsty for anything new. We were beginning to get used to our new life, to freedom. We could go out whenever we wanted. Well, almost. Ishan Khan's wife kept a close eye on us. Once she gave us some money and we went to the movies. It was just like Kareem said. We saw an Indian film that lasted 4 hours and I cried the whole time. Iqbal was nasty and wouldn't go see it a second time. We discovered television. We listened to strange music that came from far away. From America, they said. Iqbal was full of plans for the future. He talked about them to Maria and me. He wasn't afraid of all the new things. I was, at least a little. Everything was happening so fast, or maybe I was afraid the happy dream would end too fast. One day, a foreign person in strange clothes came to headquarters. He said he was an American reporter. He interviewed Iqbal and Ishan Khan for 2 hours. A few days later, an international correspondent came. "When people abroad know about our cause, they'll help us and we'll be safer," said Ishan Khan. One night we were awakened by a loud explosion. We could hear screams and see flames rising up to the windows on the second floor. We tried to go downstairs, but Ishan Khan stopped us. "You stay here," he roared. Someone had thrown 2 incendiary bombs against headquarters. A man was injured and had to go to the hospital. They had sent a warning. End of chapter 12.